You have spent years working on yourself under the assumption that what you need is not yet present, that the peace, the clarity, the fundamental okayness you are looking for is somewhere ahead, on the other side of enough practice, enough understanding, enough healing of the right wounds and correction of the right patterns. The self-improvement project is organized around a gap, what you are now versus what you need to become. Bankei, a 17th century Japanese Zen master who drew crowds of thousands with a teaching so simple it offended the other monks, said the gap is the illusion, that what you have been seeking was present before the seeking began, that it is present right now underneath the seeking, available at this moment without a single additional step. He called it the Unborn, and he spent 50 years pointing at it in the plainest language he could find. There is something that serious practitioners of any tradition, meditation, therapy, philosophy, spiritual practice, tend not to say publicly but recognize privately, that after years of genuine work, the thing they were working toward has not quite arrived in the form that was promised. The practice has produced real benefits, more awareness, more resilience, better relationships, and underneath all of it, something that feels like the fundamental condition of being alive has not changed. The anxiety that the practice was supposed to dissolve is still there, quieter, perhaps, more familiar, but present. The sense of not quite enough that the accumulation was supposed to address has simply moved, like water, into a different container. Bankei looked at this pattern and said the practice has been pointing at something real, but the framework around the practice has been wrong. The framework that says you are insufficient and must become sufficient, that you are broken and must be repaired, that the thing you are looking for is not yet here. His teaching is the direct refutation of this framework, not as consolation, but as description. What you actually are right now, before the practice and before the improvement and before the understanding that has not yet arrived, is already what you have been trying to become. The seeking has been real. The sought is already present. And the recognition of this, which Bankei called the Unborn, is not the endpoint of a long path. It is available in this moment, as this moment, without any qualification. Bankei Yotaku was born in 1622 in Hamada, a small town on the western coast of Japan's main island. His early years were marked by a ferocity of seeking that the accounts describe in terms that anyone who has been seriously committed to a spiritual question will recognize. He was a difficult child, not from laziness, but from intensity. He was expelled from school for arguing with his teachers. He became obsessed in his early teens with the phrase from the Confucian Great Learning, the luminous virtue. What was it exactly? How is it accessed? Where did it live in a person, and what did its presence feel like? No one around him could answer satisfactorily. He began a period of practice that the accounts describe as genuinely extreme, fasting to the point of illness, sitting in meditation through cold nights, pushing the body and mind past what most practitioners would consider sensible limits. He developed serious tuberculosis. He coughed blood. He came to what seemed like the edge of his life. And at the edge, the question resolved, not through a dramatic vision, through a recognition that arrived in the middle of an ordinary moment, the smell of plum blossoms by some accounts, of something that had been present the whole time, something that preceded the practice and would survive its ending. Something that was not the product of the seeking, but the ground from which the seeking had been happening all along.
He called it the Unborn, Fushō in Japanese, the aspect of mind that was never born and therefore never dies, that does not arise in dependence on conditions and therefore is not subject to their changes, that is not produced by the practice and therefore cannot be lost when the practice falters. He spent the next 50 years trying to say this in language plain enough that ordinary people, farmers, merchants, samurai, women who had never entered a monastery, could receive it directly without the elaborate scaffolding of formal Zen training. He was remarkably successful. His sermons drew thousands. People traveled from across Japan to sit with him. What they found was not the formal koan practice of the Renzai school or the elaborate ritual of institutional Buddhism. They found a teacher sitting in ordinary language pointing at something immediately available, saying, in effect, you already have what you came here looking for. The question is whether you are willing to recognize it. The Zen establishment of his day was not uniformly pleased. His teaching bypassed the traditional structures, the years of formal training, the koan curriculum, the institutional hierarchy, and pointed directly at what the structures were designed to produce. Some teachers found this liberating, others found it threatening. Bankei largely ignored the controversy and kept teaching. He died in 1693 at 71, having spent half a century saying essentially one thing in as many different ways as the situation required. What is the unborn? Because the term sounds abstract and the teaching is anything but. Bankei's most direct description: when you are startled by a sudden sound, a bird, a door slamming, a voice, and before you have time to think what that was or whether to be afraid, something has already registered the sound. Something was already alert, already present. Before the commentary, before the reaction, before the categorizing mind gets involved. That something is the unborn. Not a soul in the theological sense, not a metaphysical substance. The luminous, aware, already present quality of mind that is the precondition of every experience you have ever had, and that is therefore never itself an experience. It cannot be seen because it is the seeing. It cannot be known as an object because it is the knowing. It is what remains when the content of the mind, the thoughts, the emotions, the reactions, the stories, is seen as content rather than mistaken for the ground. This is what Bankei means when he says you were born with everything you need, not that you were born with the right personality or the right circumstances or the right degree of development, that you were born with the unborn, with this prior, luminous, already alert quality of awareness that is the source of everything else, and that no amount of failure or damage or inadequacy can touch, because it is not a product of conditions and therefore not subject to their erosions. The implications are immediate and practical. When you act from anger, Bankei says, you are exchanging the unborn for a demon of your own making. The anger is real. The situation that produced it may be genuinely unjust, but in the moment of being consumed by the anger, you have temporarily vacated the clarity that was available and replaced it with a reactive narrowing. Not permanently, the unborn does not go anywhere, but functionally, for the duration of the reaction, you are not operating from your original nature. His instruction for working with this is disarmingly simple. When the anger, the anxiety, the craving arises, recognize it as it arises. Not analyze it, not process it, not understand its origins. Recognize. The recognition itself is the return to the unborn, because the thing that recognizes the anger is not angry. The thing that sees the anxiety is not anxious. The awareness in which the reaction appears is already clear.
This is the whole of the teaching, not as a technique to be mastered, as a recognition to be made again and again in the ordinary moments of an ordinary life. Now, the bridge. Because Bankei was a 17th century Japanese Zen master speaking to farmers and samurai in the specific cultural context of Edo period Japan. But here is what translates without any adjustment. The moment before the reaction, the split second between the difficult email arriving and the anger that follows it, in that interval, something was already present, something alert, clear, not yet disturbed. You have felt this.
the moment of pure registering before the commentary begins, the still point before the response. Bankei is saying that is not a moment on the way to the real experience. That is the unborn. That is what all the practice was pointing at, and it is available, not at the end of enough practice, not on the other side of enough healing, right there, in the interval, as often as you are willing to recognize it. The self-improvement framework says you need to become. Bankei says you already are. The task is not addition, it is recognition. And recognition, unlike becoming, requires no time, no qualification, no further preparation. It requires only the willingness to look at what is already here. Here is what Bankei asks of you, practically, today. First, notice the unborn in the interval. Choose one moment today, a moment of transition, the pause before a response, the second after waking before the day's concerns arrive, and pay attention to what is present before the thinking begins. Not what you are thinking, what is aware of the thinking. The quality of alert presence that is the precondition of every thought, but is not itself a thought. You do not need to hold it. You do not need to sustain it or develop it. Simply notice it once, briefly, honestly. That noticing, however fleeting, is contact with what Bankei spent 50 years pointing at. It was always there. The noticing is not the creation of it. It is the recognition of what was already present.
Second, practice the recognition rather than the management. When a difficult emotion arises today, the irritation, the anxiety, the craving, try Bankei's instruction instead of the usual management strategy. Rather than processing the emotion, suppressing it, or analyzing its origins, simply recognize it. Name it if you like. Here is anger, here is anxiety, and then notice what is recognizing it. The thing that sees the anger is not angry. The awareness in which the anxiety appears is not anxious. This is not a technique for making the emotion go away. It is the recognition of what you already are underneath the emotion, which is, Bankei says, already sufficient, already clear, already, without any addition, the luminous virtue that he spent his teenage years desperately seeking, and found, finally, by stopping long enough to see what had been present the whole time. Third, question the gap. The self-improvement framework is organized around a gap between what you are and what you need to become. Bankei's teaching invites a direct examination of this gap. Is it real? Is the fundamental thing you are looking for, the peace, the clarity, the okayness, genuinely absent? Or is it present, available, temporarily obscured by the activity of a mind that has been convinced it needs to produce what it already is? Sit with this question for 5 minutes, not to answer it conceptually, to look directly at the quality of awareness that is present right now, in this moment, before the assessment of whether it is sufficient begins. Ask, is anything actually missing from the awareness itself? Fourth, stop acquiring and start recognizing. Bankei's most practical instruction for the serious practitioner. Every new teaching, every new technique, every new framework that is added to the practice is, in some sense, a movement away from the recognition that the practice is designed to produce. Not because learning is wrong, because there comes a point at which more input is a way of avoiding the simple, direct, unglamorous recognition that the thing you have been seeking is already present. Identify one thing you have been adding to the practice, one more book, one more retreat, one more framework, and instead of adding it, spend the equivalent time in simple recognition, sitting, present, not seeking, not improving, just here as what you already are, with the specific quality of attention that Bankei called the unborn, and that you have been, this whole time, looking for. I want to close with the image that stays with me when I think about Bankei. Not the crowds of thousands, not the controversy with the Zen establishment, not the 50 years of teaching.
The moment with the plum blossoms. The young man who has been pushing himself past every limit, who has coughed blood, who has arrived at what seems like the end of his capacity and perhaps the end of his life. And in that moment, not through achievement, not through the final successful execution of the practice, but through the exhaustion of the seeking, something is recognized that was present before the seeking began. He did not find the unborn, he recognized it. The recognition was available before the years of practice. The practice burned away the conviction that it wasn't. And what remained when the conviction was gone was simply what had always been there. That is the teaching, not a destination reached after sufficient effort, a recognition available right now, in this moment, to the person who is willing to stop adding long enough to see what is already present. You were born with everything you need, not as inspiration, as description. The luminous, aware, already present quality of mind that you are, right now, before the improvement, and after the failure, and in the middle of the ordinary Tuesday, has never required anything added to it to be what it is. The recognition is the arrival, and the arrival, Bankei kept saying for 50 years, was always already here. Here is the question Bankei leaves us with today. Not from the monastery, not from the crowds or the controversy or the plum blossoms, from the interval, from the still point before the response that you have access to right now, in this moment, before anything further is added. What is present in that interval? Not what you were thinking, what is aware of the thinking. What was there before this video began and will be there after it ends and has never, not once, required anything from you in order to be present? Can you recognize it? Just once? Just briefly? Just here? Leave that in the comments, because naming the recognition, even imperfectly, even with the conceptual language that the unborn exceeds, is the beginning of the practice that Bankei said required no beginning. It was always already underway. I'll see you in the next one.